So next, we're going to switch to sort of a conversation with myself and Diana Benner, a co-owner of the Watershed Nursery Cooperative, which is a local native plant nursery. And Diana has some slides, but we're also both here on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with a question for Diana. Maybe basic for some, but maybe not. A really foundational one. Why use native plants in habitat restoration projects, Diana?
All right. Hi. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great question. And I think that Jeannie and Tobias's presentation answers that question really well with the example of what happened when the non-native Spartina was brought in. And that wasn't where I was going to start, but I was just like, that in and of itself is enough of a reason for us to really focus on plants that are native to our region. We also are incredibly blessed in California. We're a native plant nursery. We love native plants. California is a great place for that. We have a huge diversity of plant species because of the topographic diversity in California. So it's a very fun place to be a native plant nursery. But in regards to restoration, this example of what can happen when species of the same genus are brought in from elsewhere, and the hybridization potential. Spartina is not the only example of that. So it's one I'm pretty passionate about people being careful around. In addition to that concern, there's all of the benefits of, because they're California native plants, they have evolved with our local native fauna. So you're making all the birds and bees happy and butterflies, and then also, people happy when they get to see all those wonderful critters enjoying and getting optimal resources from those native plants that they've co-evolved with. In addition to that, because the plants grew up here, evolved here, they're adapted to climatic conditions in California, to soil conditions. So you often have lower water needs, lower maintenance needs, although as Jeannie said, initial maintenance is very critical. But you can, in the long run, they're adapted to the soils around California, specifically here around the Bay Area for our native plants. So in the long run, they can be more resilient and established. Another point really specifically for this group that I just wanted to touch on because of the habitats that are being focused on is when we think about impacts to habitats around the bay, the shoreline in particular, going back to Jeremy's thing of, all the fill and development and all that, that these are areas that have been really highly impacted historically. And so the opportunity to approach these projects and bring back the habitat quality that is provided by these plants in these areas is a really unique opportunity. So I think it's especially important, I think they're especially important everywhere in all restoration projects, but it's a really neat opportunity with these types of projects to increase this habitat type around the bay.
Awesome. So, and can you talk about some of the key differences between a regular commercial nursery and a restoration growing native plant nursery?
I would love to. So when you go to a standard commercial nursery, people are looking for a plant that is very consistent. So they're looking for a certain color of flower or height, growth, habit, or whatever aspect of it that is reliably produced so the gardener knows what they're putting into their garden. Which means that they really have to be the same individual plant to be reliable like that. So the majority of commercially produced plants are done vegetatively, primarily cuttings, sometimes divisions. But so that means that Ceanothus Julia Phelps that's sold across the country is all genetically the same individual plant. When we're thinking about restoration projects, what we know, it's not in a garden where it's being cared for. We're putting plants out into the wild, and they're going to be dealing with variable climatic features, varying pest pressures, pathogen pressures, drought years. And so with restoration projects, what we really want to have is as much genetic diversity as possible. So instead of having something that's the same DNA that we know how it's going to behave, we want to have our tool chest full of all sorts of tools. So whatever pressure comes into the community, that ideally there's going to be some DNA within the population that's able to adapt to or resist the new pressure. What that means is that we grow almost everything that we grow from seed. So each individual plant that goes out will be its own unique individual genetically. And you'll see sometimes when you go to a commercial nursery, like a species, everybody that's there is all the same height and looks exactly the same. In our nursery, they're all over the place because they're all unique. So the other thing about the genetic diversity that I want to point out, for instance, we might have yarrow that grows, which is that white flower with this one here, grows throughout a large stretch of California. But we also want diversity in our genetics, but we also want the plants to be optimally adapted for our project site. So a restoration nursery will not only be primarily growing from seed, but also collecting seed from the watershed or region or area with a similar environmental conditions of where the project is planned, so that those plants are optimally adapted for the site where the project's happening. And that's both, to optimize survival of those plants, but also thinking about if there are other populations of the same species nearby that have adapted to that area, you don't want to bring in genetics that might dilute the adaptations of those existing populations. So those are all things that we're considering in our restoration mindset of plant material that is quite different from a commercial nursery, because we're growing for restoration, and everybody here who's working on restoration knows that there's every site is unique. Every site has its own specific conditions that make it hard to put general rules that fit for every site. And the Spartina project is a great example of that, because although we generally try to do everything from seed, because of the hybrid and non-native genetics in the Bay Area, that was an example where actually it was the advisable approach for that was to do it vegetatively, because we wanted to make sure to have the native species rather than a hybrid or non-native. So as in all restorations, it's hard to make absolutes, and sometimes you have to do it vegetatively because of these external pressures that have been introduced to a system. So that's another difference than a commercial nursery. If we really are working very closely with the clients and having to be very responsive, not just to their timeline and their palette and their permit requirements and flexibility and all of that, but really having to respond to, okay, it hasn't rained, so we have to wait to put the plant material out, or this permit got delayed, so we can't put the plant material out. Anyway, a lot of considerations that do not come up in general commercial nurseries that make it
On
fun.
that front, I want to thank you for the patience of the native plant nursery on all of those issues that can come up despite our best laid plans. So we really appreciate the collaboration and careful work together to address those issues that come up and hold plants at times for those reasons. So how does that difference in propagation affect the timing of the production for plant material?
Oh, this is a great question. Next slide, please. Okay, so timing consideration. Obviously, there's the whole design feature of projects, and that takes such a long time. And often people will come to us and say, okay, the design's ready, we're ready for the plants. But They need a certain palette and they need to be watershed specific. And so that is not, they're not like widgets sitting on a shelf, right? We need to have a time to be able to get the appropriate material for the project. So each species, I have, 5 examples here of things like the up in your right-hand corner. Thank you. Yes, oh no, left-hand corner. That's our native grass, Stipopulchra, and those are relatively quick to grow if we have the seed. But if somebody wanted site-specific material within the watershed of their project, and they asked for it in September, and we didn't have the seed in our inventory, we would have to wait till the following May, June to collect that seed and grow it. So even though the project might be ready, to have the appropriate plant material would take a year at least to be able to get it, just because of the seed, the time that seed is produced on that plant. And I mentioned that stipe is relatively quick to grow. So if we have seed, we can grow it and, have it well rooted in a small container that I'll talk about soon, in a sort of 4 month time period. This little guy down here in the middle, this is pickleweed. A lot of the marsh pictures that Jeannie was showing of coming in early, and despite it's moving in so quickly, and it does revegetate in wetlands well, but growing it's incredibly slow grower. We can do it. We often will have to start it in March. So it's almost, 7-8 months of growing to get something that's well rooted to go out. So that's a consideration for a palette that's provided to us is, do we have the seed already or not? Do we have to collect it? When is the seeding time for that species? And then how much time does it take to propagate that individual species? So it is something for us. We will have people reach out to us saying, we have this thing maybe coming down the line, which is helpful for us, of just knowing when seed from a particular watershed and habitat type might be needed. And then we'll also have projects where they'll contract just some collecting time so we have the right amount of seed, and then wait on the contracting for plant material, because that's often a chunkier cost than the collecting time. And then we know we have the propagable material ready when they're ready.
Awesome. That was a great discussion. We have a couple more minutes for these last two. So are there other differences that may be noticed in restoration stock?
Okay, next slide. I'm going to be quick. Okay, this one is not, it's a lot of information. It's on our website. You don't need to look at it. I just wanted to point out the containers, because restoration projects grow in containers that can be unfamiliar if you've been in commercial nurseries. And they're basically designed to have a nice root to shoot ratio. So often restoration sites don't have great irrigation options. So you want to get the roots deep towards the groundwater without having a whole lot of shoot material that will stress out trying with the evapotranspiration. Just wanted to expose people to that. And then, yeah, next slide, because this one's near and dear to my heart. And we were just cruising along, being a nursery, growing plants very happily. And then in 2014, some material went out from a restoration nursery, not us, that had a Phytophthora species, which is the species, a genus that it means plant destroyer. And sudden oak death is caused by a species of Phytophthora. So obviously this is entirely contrary to all restoration nursery mission and goals. And in that process, a lot of testing was done by the CDFA and plant pathologists up at UC Davis. And it's a rather shockingly high level of disease that is prevalent in the nursery industry. Sudden oak death is a great example of it being spread. And there's not a fungicide, it's not really a fungus, but anyway, that will kill it. But there are chemicals that can suppress it. So many nursery practices can enhance the habitat for diseases. And they can be suppressed with chemicals in the nursery, but then if they go out and they're not getting treated anymore, those diseases can expand and spread into the habitat. So we were crushed. But we've worked with the Phytophthora working group and developed best management practices for being the goal is to exclude Phytophthora from nursery production. So this slide is just an example of some of those things. Yes, you can click that one now. We do like to reuse our containers because we don't want to fill up landfill. And so we have a generator and we steam them all. You have to get to 140 degrees for a half hour, but not so hot that we melt them. So we do that. And then also if you can click in the lower one with the steam generator on the soil, I think that's an animation also, yeah. We also now heat treat all of our media that we pot into. There are components. What we get is like not a nice developed soil. It's media. So it's often components that have been thrown together, a couple of days before it's sent to us. But some of those components could be sand or fir bark or compost or other things that can have, I'm showing the air bubble in there, that can have pathogens in them. So we heat treat our soil as well. Plants are up off the ground. We also do this very intensive pair testing on a random basis. It's not totally random, but around the nursery to be checking our own BMPs are being successful in excluding it. Okay, thank you. And the final slide, because I'm going quickly now, is just to reiterate that restoration nurseries are focused on genetics and disease issues in a way that commercial nurseries are not as much, and with the goal of providing appropriate genetically and the healthiest plant material to contribute to the success of restoration projects.